beginning condition of this floor that will be polished is a thin set and epoxy covered concrete slab. The machine is being prepared with triple PCD cutting tools. The machine is a rotary machine. It's 30 amp, 220 volt. And being a rotary, of course, one head is counterclockwise and the other is clockwise. The PCDs are directional, so it's important to know which tools are turning which direction. Cutting through this amount of material, which is thin set over a couple layers of epoxy, is certainly going to affect how quickly the machine can do the work. Whether the machine can cut through all the layers at one go or if it has to go over it multiple times is really going to depend on the slab as far as the hardness of the concrete and being able to support that kind of aggressive cutting. And then of course the material that's on top of it. The resiliency or tenacity of that material is going to affect how many times the machine has to go over it. The slab below it is in good shape, so the machine could cut through all those layers slowly, but through all those layers to expose the clean concrete. Once the bulk waste is removed by vacuum wand, the tools are changed to a 25-30 medium bond segment. The floor is ground smooth. A closer look at the surface will show the difference in the profile that's being created versus what it was. This is a CSP2 or a 25-30 scratch. It's not smooth, but it's much more refined than how the PCDs left the surface. The PCDs leave a rough profile. The 25-30s are responsible for changing that and replacing it to a more smooth, or in this case, what's equivalent to a CSP2 profile. Next will be the 70 grit diamonds. As the process continues to a final polish, the 70 grits are going to be responsible for removing the scratches made by the 25-30. It could be categorized as a honing step or simply just scratch removal or scratch removal and replacement. This particular tool works best wet. Though it can be run dry, it is going to be more effective and more productive, being that the final result of polished concrete is very dependent upon these early steps. The aim here is to refine the surface the best it possibly can be early on in the process rather than fix it later. A closer look shows the scratches from the 70 grit. Though the scratches can be seen, it is more smooth than the 25-30. The 25-30, the CSP2, is very rough by comparison. The process continues over the whole area. After the 70 grit is completed, the surface is washed. This is to remove any of the slurry that may have gotten into the pores of the concrete and dried. The floor needs to be cleaned so the densifier can be the most effective it can at absorbing into the concrete and reacting with that calcium hydroxide to form a densified, hardened layer that will contribute to the quality of the final polish. Next will be a 100 grit copper pad. This pad will be used to remove the scratches left by the 70 grit and replace them with a more consistent, more uniform, higher frequency scratch pattern that can only come from a copper pad. The reason a copper pad is used at this point is because of its aggressive nature of cutting, but also the fact that it leaves a scratch that a resin pad can then follow. A pad like this can be referred to as a transitional, a hybrid, or a bridge step. As would be normal, densifier is being applied after the copper cut. With polishing of concrete that's existing and has had to be ground because of previous floor coverings that were removed, extra densifier steps may be necessary. During the so-called normal polishing process, densifier would usually be applied at this step. Here it happens to be the second application. The next step in the process is a 200-400 hybrid. It is a more fine cutting hybrid pad that's going to act more like a resin than it is a copper. It's not a very aggressive pad to make its own scratch, but when following that copper, it helps to close the scratches that the copper left to the point where the next pad will easily refine the surface to a gloss. This step is also done wet. For the same reason the preceding steps were done wet, this helps the pad to cut more smoothly. It lubricates the cut as though it were cutting a granite or a marble. The water makes it possible that the diamond can cut any hardness of concrete when it follows that 100 grit copper. Next is an 800 grit pad. This is a dry step. Water is not needed at this point because the floor has already been processed and refined by that step that preceded it. It is removing and replacing those scratches, but as can be seen, the color change in the concrete is drastic. This particular pad is responsible for bringing out the shine from a floor that's already been refined. Next is an 1800. This is also a resin pad. Though the color change is not much, the refinement of the surface has led to a clarity and reflection. Next is a 3500. This is the final step in this particular process. Like the pad that preceded it, it doesn't change the color much, but it changes the quality of the reflection, or what's also called clarity. And that's about it. A floor that was covered in thin set and epoxy has been ground and polished to a clear reflective shine.